Great, thank you so much. So I'm very honored to be joined by Phil Kelly and Jacob Everly from RISC-Zero. If you wanted to just maybe introduce yourself and talk about your experience in the ZK space and your sort of role, it'd be great to get us started.
Yep, so Phil Kelly, I'm officially independent this weekend, so I was like, still contributing to Mina and 01 last week, but I'm starting something new tomorrow, so I'm going to announce that tomorrow. But yeah, I've spent the last 2.5 years with 01, which is the team that built Mina, and I think you all know, hopefully, but Mina was the first recursive ZK-based L1. So that was an amazing breakthrough, and launched in limited form about 3 years ago, and then there's been work going on the last, since then, to add a verification layer to that, which was successfully launched, I guess, about 2 months ago now. So, they did a lot of pioneering in the space. And then at the same time, they were building 01.js, which is an SDK that allows you to write circuits using TypeScript. And especially for client side in browser proving, that's a pretty cool thing to be able to do. Inherits tooling around, TypeScript tooling around that, so you've got a set of tooling out the box that works with that. Pretty intuitive to use, and has unlimited recursion in it, so you can do pretty cool things client side. So all of that is amazing work. And yeah, I'm moving on somewhere else, but I've been working on a lot of use cases over the last couple of years. I think we're going to be picking up the thorny privacy and identity conversation again, because I've got some things to say about that, but I'll hand over to Jacob.
Awesome. Yeah, and I mean, ON Labs always impresses me. I'll like hear about something new and be like, oh, ON has been doing that for like 2 years. Yeah. It's incredibly prolific in some of these things. Yep. So.
Yeah, I'm Jacob. I started my ZK journey like a few years ago. I was in grad school. I did some like application-based research around ZK. And I moved on. I went to go help like lead product at Avalanche for a little bit over a year. And then I recently, about like 4 or 5 months ago, joined RISC-Zero. Now I'm the product lead for the protocol we're building, Boundless. The TLDR of Boundless is we're just bringing ZK to every chain. As you can think about it, like Chainlink brought price feeds to all these chains. We're just going to make sure ZK can actually be used by all these chains.
Awesome. That's good. So something we touched on in the technical talk, but I think we probably also want to hear is around identity, which integrates privacy for sure, but it feels like there's a lot of product areas that come out of that, and you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, and again, like speaking in a personal capacity, not for Mina or 01, but yeah, I mean, it for sure there's a really long way to go with identity and privacy, and there's a lot of valid debate about how much people really care about privacy right now versus how much they should, and where that sits versus the privacy is normal narrative. But all that said, there is a huge number of really innovative use cases that are unlocked by identity and privacy. And a lot of the stuff that goes on in Web3 currently is a little bit kind of cut and paste and do better from what was innovated multiple years ago. And then there's all this set of new pretty difficult things that you can do if you get identity and privacy right. And it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. So having said it's super important, the product market fit so far in terms of what people have adopted is pretty limited, and I'd argue that the main one that's proven is private transactions, and then that's at a rocky start with Tornado, but there's some great things going on now with Pay, for example, PAYY. That's really interesting, and I think that actually is a good example of what somebody was referring to earlier, which is that people don't necessarily quote-unquote normal people don't necessarily care that much about privacy when you really get down to it, and they have to rely on custodians. But that doesn't necessarily work in the Web3 world. And so if people in Argentina, for example, who actually have a burning need and have chosen to adopt stablecoins and make peer-to-peer payments, and they're doing it regularly, then they've got wallets with tons of information on that they really do have a current burning need for privacy. And so I think that argument about privacy is overrated. It's certainly true at the moment, but the more we start to adopt some of these cool Web3 use cases, the more it actually becomes critical. So I think there are some interesting things to talk about. Also, you were referring earlier to voting, and there really is ZK and privacy used in voting already. So, Estonia has this self-sovereign national identity system, and they use ZK for proof of tally. And there've been experiments with, like live experiments in the field with ZK in Canada, for example, where they've allowed people to prove to themselves that their anonymous vote is included in the result of a vote. But there's some also really funny stories about that, because when they launched this, they had people calling in saying, like, what the hell is this thing? Like, why do I have to check whether my vote was included or not? And trying to get an explanation of how it works. So there's real human hitting the normal human issues with that.
New alien technology.
New alien technology, yeah. Anyway, I guess my point is, I do think it's a huge holy grail in the industry. The identity sector, hasn't really found its way yet. But I think with things like Reclaim, that are offering more underlying primitives, and then as the use cases emerge that will use them, then at some stage you're going to get a big coalescence of identity and verified credentials and privacy around it. Sorry, Jacob.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think a lot of the use cases, at least the way we're seeing from our end, is just around like the succinctness, right? Execution on a blockchain is very expensive. Let me go do it in ZK, it's cheaper right now. I think another thing that like privacy can do is just make protocols more efficient. You look at like what Penumbra is doing, what Cycles plans on doing. Pretty much if you use a DEX, you get wrecked nowadays. If you use a SEX, you get wrecked nowadays. I think there's some really interesting ZK protocols that are in the pipeline that privacy actually just makes the market more efficient. And then people will care about privacy if it saves them money. So yeah.
You mentioned like stablecoin in Argentina, or this voting system used in Estonia. I'm curious how you see these, like, because I know of different use cases that people talk about, like X is happening in Y country. How much do you feel like this informs what we should expect out of the future, like global demand, versus like, oh, this is just interesting, but like kind of niche for that condition?
Well, I may be dodging the question a little bit here, but I mean, I do think there's going to be regional differences, and I mean, probably one good example of exactly what you're saying is that there's this voting system offered by Rarimo that's being used offered in Russia to allow people to prove that they have a Russian passport and they haven't used it before for this voting, and then have a shadow national vote. So that's probably something that is. I mean, it's not necessarily going to be worldwide, but it could be, could catch on in some countries. But I think also, some of this stuff is going to be regulation driven, and that's where I think the EU is really interesting, because number one, they've got the EU DI initiative, which has got a lot of money behind it in terms of EU budget. That's actually even got a ZK tracker in it. So there will likely be digital identity, and they're looking at the potential to use ZK as an add-on to that. I mean, it could be a long time coming, but it's on the books already in terms of the budgeted initiative that's in the research phase. The other thing is, in Europe, you've got obviously GDPR, and again, Jacob and I think we're just agreeing violently on this before. Even if individuals don't care about privacy, companies do, because they've got to pay for it. They've got to pay for GDPR costs, compliance costs, and they also have to pay for cybersecurity and the cost of remediation if that gets breached. So you could see, for example, potentially companies saying, "Look, I don't want your data. Prove that you've got it, and then I won't have to do GDP compliance or cybersecurity or remediation costs." Yeah, yeah. So there's a few things that could make the EU a breakout case, I think.
I think like in general, we just live in this like cybersecurity world of like, it's like the fortress and wall architecture. Let me throw everyone's sensitive data in the fortress, build a wall. Turns out those walls are really bad at keeping people out. So if we just start to like fragment sensitive data across sources, it helps a lot. I think it's a $1 trillion industry, cybersecurity. Web 2 companies have blank checks when it comes to protecting this sensitive data. If you reduce the amount of sensitive data they have to hold on to continue business operations, I think it's very, very ripe. Google and Apple communicate data all the time. Google would love not to send it to Apple, and Apple would love to not to send it. It would just save them a lot of money.
I say, for like compliance and regulation reasons versus like the value of the data and their desire for it not to be stolen.
Because that's right. If you, I don't know whether you saw when Apple announced its AI engine, and for the first time they can't let you keep everything local. You have to send some things in centrally because it's just not technically possible right now. So they're rightly stressed out about that, and I kind of admire amongst the big tech companies. I kind of admire them for their how serious they take privacy. So they published a blog talking about how they were going to handle data internally, and I swear it could have been a blog on off-chain verifiable computation. I mean, it like maps exactly onto ZK. So I think when ZK, continues its massive pace of innovation in terms of performance, then basically the blueprint is there in what Apple already blogged about.
Yeah, our founder loves internet standards, and he loves to go to internet standard conferences, and he's been coming back recently, and like the improvements they want are the properties that you get from ZK. It's just not performant enough yet. So I think at RISC-Zero, we feel very strongly that like Web 2 will have a ZK moments somewhere in the future.
How do you think about working with those like larger enterprise or governments that move at a slower pace than we're used to in this kind of crypto-centric startup?
Yeah, you need really good security documentation. You need to have a team that is just like kind of comes from that world in general, like people who have worked at three-letter agencies and worked at like the best security teams in the world. It's definitely a different set of standards. They're live in production, protecting billions of dollars of data already. So sort of like when you come to them, it's like they needed the solutions yesterday, so you better be ready.
I see. And when you talk about those people working at your company, is that because they already have the language of these larger companies, or because it's like, Yeah, I
would say RISC-Zero is like not traditional Web3 people. It's just a bunch of people that have worked on like Web 2 security teams for 20, 30 years.
It's kind of standout in that way, honestly, looking at your team. But, do you think it will take some like change of perception of Web3 or of ZK, or is ZK kind of going in fresh with these conversations?
Yeah, I think ZK isn't necessarily associated with Web3. It's really like a cryptographic primitive. It actually translates really well to people that do security. They pick it up a lot faster than you would think.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be some, it will probably be healthy for the ZK industry to run into Web 2 and get put through the paces, because there's just lots of things. The user experience standards that we all accept in Web 3, never going to fly in Web 2 all the time. And then also, the business case side of things. If you think about I've been thinking quite a bit about authenticity of media, and you could have signed pictures, for example, images from your iPhone camera, and like a lot of news media now is sourced from people's from people's phones. So yeah, in theory you could work with that, but pretty much all those pictures now are automatically enhanced as you take them and store them. So then maybe you could have ZK proving that there was only like general enhancement and there wasn't actual changing of the picture. But so my point is, can you imagine Apple saying, okay, we're gonna add another 5% to the storage and the processing overhead because we're gonna have every photograph ZK proven. There are gonna be a lot more testing on cost and kind of overhead and performance issues than Web3 is.
Right. They need a good reason to do that.
They really
Don't necessarily have that yet. I had a question in a different direction, which is about verifiable AI. I noticed this mentioned in Boundless's kind of release PR, and I also saw a number of talks at SBC about this. So I'm curious if you could speak about, I guess, how you're envisioning that and how you're integrating that into your product roadmap.
Yeah. So first of all, we don't need mean training. I don't think you should ever train a model in ZK. It doesn't make sense. People are struggling to have enough GPU to do effective training today. I think a better use case is like inference. So like running a model in ZK and like verifying that the response the user is getting is from the model they're paying for. It was about a year ago that everyone claimed that ChatGPT was giving stupid answers all of a sudden. I think it's probably likely that they were like, if you gave a stupid question, that they were like sending you to a smaller model because they're just so throttled on network bandwidth. That's definitely possible. You need like 10 megahertz of like RISC-V cycles per second. You can get that across multiple 4090s today. We've ran some smaller models in the ZKVM already. So think in the like 20 to 40 million parameter, quite small, 20 to 40 million parameter range. It's not on the immediate roadmap. It was more like, you know, what can we see in the next like year or two?
Cool. Do you feel like, I was gonna add on another question.
Go ahead,
Yeah. How much do you like research into trends in AI to try to see where like this kind of collaborative effort is going? Because there's a lot going on there, but you could just kind of bet on that like some interest is gonna be there. But there's different things you could try to verify in the process, as you mentioned, like reasonably unrealistic, maybe forever to like do training on chain, but you want inference or you want these different sorts of things.
Yeah, I would say we're like very, very customer driven, and no customer has asked for this. It's just an idea we've had. We did it for fun at the offsite like a month ago. Same thing as like we caught a Pokemon in ZK. I don't think anyone's asking for that. We just did it for fun. I think, you know, the main use cases we're seeing right now is just like, it's just cheaper to run it in the ZKVM now than it is to do it on any chain. So we're just seeing a bunch of people just do like skeuomorphic things off chain. You can like put a Solidity smart contract in our ZKVM now. So for the next year, that's what I would expect from people.
I was going to jump in and say, you know, we obviously ZK AIs, or ZK ML is like a really interesting use case, and you know, you can see why it's going to be super important. It's a really interesting narrative. But I think, you know, we talk about these very intuitive use cases like, you know, ZK voting and identity and games, all this kind of stuff that like, humans understand. And then we talk about ZK ML, and there's this huge category in between, which is just like ZK proving calculations. So it doesn't have to be AI and ML. There's all kinds of things that could be usefully proved by ZK in just general verifiable off-chain computation and proof of a model. And so an example, you know, pretty boring example of that maybe, but maybe more which will illustrate the point. All of that proof of solvency stuff that was discussed and has sort of gone a bit quiet now, but proof of solvency for centralized exchanges. I mean, that's basically, you know, proving that they did the math correctly, just taking all the customer deposits, proving that they added up correct, taking all the assets, proving they added up correct, and that, you know, when you divide one by the other, it's more than one. Well, yeah, well, yeah, in terms of asset coverage. So there's just tons of things like general proof of accounts that are short of AI, but they're models that the world, you know, right now trusts and sometimes shouldn't.
Sometimes shouldn't. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's, you know, I mean, your supply chain. Again, another pretty boring example. Supply chain. I mean, you know, your order, or maybe you are putting something out to tender. You've got companies bidding. They say they've got the item in their inventory. It would be nice if they could prove it as an entry condition into the bidding, because you might award a bid and then find out they don't have it.
You're relying on like old-fashioned third party or like other incentives?
Right now, yeah, or self-attestation. Yeah, yeah.
I think my use case I'm most excited about right now of like a more traditional thing is supply chain and like software development. So like, how do I know if I'm, you know, using this downstream library, if it's like actually the code that they give him? You see, like, it's probably the most common attack currently in like the Linux master library, right? Of like, I've just been given this binary, you know, like, is this the actual stuff? We've all seen the meme of like, oh, there's this 50-year-old male in the middle of Nebraska maintaining this library that the whole internet is dependent on. There's actually like a really nasty one 6 months ago to where this guy, like, you know, maintained this Rust library or some library for Linux for like 30 years, gave it off. Someone put like a back door in it, and it almost got merged into the master Linux file. And like some Microsoft person noticed the runtime was 3 milliseconds difference. It was like, whoa. But it was about to get in. So could you like do ZK compiling? Yeah, like
saving us.
yeah, like can you do ZK compilation of like a code and make sure that this code is the binary? It could make it a lot more secure.
I haven't really thought this through, but is there like verifiable, like some new form of testing that involves verification of some sort of thing being within bounds? I'm not sure.
Yeah, not yet, but you can. There's definitely a way to throw these compilers like in a general purpose ZKVM, and then I think tech companies would be very interested in making sure the code is like actually the code they're getting.
Cool. So thinking about web proofs, I know ZK-TLS has started to be more of a conversation, and some applications outside of blockchain. Well, I guess the supply chain work that Microsoft has done does make use of blockchain very effectively, that ledger. But it feels like it's broadening what we would consider an application for ZK. How do you think we should like respond to that? Should more companies stop doing infra, or is this like, do we need more infra because there's more clarity around product direction? If you had to take a guess, what do you think is going to be the effect of that?
You mean of the availability of more Web2 primitives?
More use cases, yeah. Or like, for example, just that web proofs are a use case.
Yeah. No, I don't think there should be less infrastructure. I mean, I think it's just it's an unlock for a lot of Web3 use cases. I think, I mean, it's really interesting. I know, Maddie was saying, don't get overexcited about Vampire. But I think there's tons, I mean, that's absolutely something that doesn't even need a blockchain. It could be an entirely Web2 use case. And I think it's a great example. I really like that as well because a lot of people, when they're talking about Web2 use cases, immediately go to things like compliance and ZK KYC, this kind of stuff. But we need to think about a better word for it. But like commercial vampire attacks, they don't have the compliance issues. They've got a business case immediately. So I think that's like a great example of where ZK can be very, very relevant to Web2 really quickly.
Yeah, I think good infra, the more the better. It's better.
I would argue with that. I've liked web proofs as like, the internet kind of developed these walled gardens over time, and then web proofs are like, suddenly there's no walls around you. Or like, it's like the licensing things for music that were put in, and like they have to deliver you the music. So they can't really stop you from torrenting or owning this thing that you have the rights to and then redistributing it because you need it to be able to like make use of it in the first place. And a lot of the TLS connections, like these websites can't take that away from you without massively sacrificing on the product that they're offering you. So a lot of potential there that I'm excited about. Are there?
Well, that's another one though where a lot of these unlocks depend on customers just changing their mindset, which they will, consumers will, but there's definitely a learning curve there. I mean, imagine trying to explain to the average person, okay, this is what webproof is. This is what you can do. You can actually you can turn a web to identity or credential or attribute about yourself embedded in a system into something that's like self-sovereign and independent. I mean, there's work to be done there.
Yeah. And like customer ones across regions is like a very well studied area. It's very well known that like Americans don't care about their data unless it's being like monetized without their knowing, versus like someone in Europe cares a lot more about their data, and that's why they have regulation review. Look at someone living in like an authoritarian state, they care a lot more.
Which is why, I really believe the commercial side is just a huge driver, or people being able to monetize things, which of course is why one of the reasons why WorldCoin and some of the the very few number of identity cases which are taken off is because it's a financial angle. Also, we've done work with a company that's been in the cookieless browsing space, and one of the reasons why I like that model is not just because sort of makes somebody anonymous, but because it still allows them to offer identity and credential credential information and their browsing activity, but they get paid for it. So the user gets rewards for it at least, yeah. So once you offer rewards, I mean, I think that's when things start to really change in terms of people's appreciation and behavior.
Yeah, back to the studies, Americans care about saving money.
Well, yeah, it feels like Web 2 kind of works and is free because our data is being sold, and like advertising kind of runs everything. And there's this way in which like, if you just generate web proofs everywhere you go, maybe that's what gets sold, and that's like the value derived from you, such that you can pretend that your engagement with the system and paying all these software engineers throughout the world is like free or somehow forgotten. I don't really know what world that creates, but it might happen. Yeah, I'm curious if you think about, like there's the GDPR, there's compliance in the US, in Europe, and then in other countries, and we like kind of think about these differently. And people reference them often, but how much does it feel like we actually kind of verify that what we're talking about is true? Do we do like true research into, oh, there are countries where stablecoins are really important? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'll say some words. GDPR is the big one in like Europe. The big ones in the United States are like all of the regulations around finance and stuff. There's a great thread by like, I'm forgetting, Austin Campbell the other day of like, how financial regulation works. It turns out in any rapidly growing financial startup, there tends to be like massive fraud. You just can't avoid it as you're scaling and growing to comply with everything. It's definitely a pain point that crypto is going through right now. Like, if you read,
like the business is committing fraud, right?
Yeah, they're just not compliant with the regulations.
Right.
Like a great example is like, Uniswap paid a fee to the SEC like maybe a month ago. Like, if you read the statement, the SEC actually like understood like crypto quite well, and it was like actually a good like statement and like decision, and Uniswap accepted that they were doing something illegal. It's just the rules are very complex. They're very hard to like conform to. So yeah.
When you said how well is it researched, do you mean how well are companies researching their compliance requirements, or the industry narrative about like what's?
I just hear it thrown up often of like X company does Y without like really seeing the data behind it, and I'm always afraid that like, is that real, or like is this just kind of story? But the GDPR feels like there are obvious side effects in some of the US compliance stuff as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, right now, just given the state of adoption and the rapid change of the technology, I mean, there has to be a lot of conceptualizing and, people thinking through ideas, and then there's for sure further proving to do with some of these things. And you also get narratives which are unrealistic. So, 2 years ago, or when I first was getting involved in ZK, there's quite a lot of people talking about ZK KYC as if, it was immediately possible and useful. And for normal, OFAC type, AML needs, it's absolutely not. I mean, there's almost nothing you can do. You cannot comply. I mean, there are very specific laws with policy implementation details, and you just cannot not comply with them. And you can't say, hey, well, natural justice says I should be able to use KYC, ZK. So yeah, there's narratives which get a very long way from reality, but they're not completely untrue. It's just they're unrealistic in the short term, I'd say.
And in general, like America takes a regulatory approach of let the technology go really fast and pick up the pieces behind it if bad things start happening, versus Europe, right? Like it's like second something new comes out, let's put up as many guardrails as possible to make sure something doesn't go back, which sometimes stunts growth and whatnot. But
I just had one last question here. So, feels like small execution limits are solved by ZK. Do you think we'll see, in the short term, innovation around that?
Yeah, I think that's what probably excites me about ZK the most. Right now you can just throw on-chain execution in ZK and it's just cheaper. I think we can prove like a DEX swap for a less than a tenth of a cent at the moment. But in general, you see all these blockchain architectures, they make a lot of trade-offs to like, you know, how much execution they allow. And you look at the largest execution environments and it's just very tiny. Like 30 million ETH gas, not much. Even when you look at like the new projects like Mega ETH or Monad, 100 million ETH gas is not that much either. So doing like as much computation with like continuations as possible, and you can build like much more expressive applications, I think is what excites me though. I'm seeing some people do some really cool like verifiable trading strategies that you could lock into. There's people doing just way more expressive computations of like the valuable, you know, data on chain. We have like one client, they're generating a proof the size of like 1.5 billion ETH gas 400 to 500 times a day. It's just something that's not even possible on an L2.
Yeah, I mean, I like that thinking, and I definitely think that we shouldn't assume that, you know, ZK's role is just to make everything that's already been done a bit more efficient. I think that we should assume that a lot of innovation is being constrained by not having ZK and by gas costs. I think one example of that is oracles, financial oracles. So, you know, oracles these days are pretty simple, partly because they're mostly done on chain, and you know, there's a latency issue, but there's also a cost issue. So if you were able to, you know, set a system that did Oracle calculations off chain and then just served the result on chain for verification, you could probably have much more complex oracles that had, you know, estimations of the depth of market, maybe incorporated, you know, suspicious activity as an alert in the oracle. There's all kinds of stuff you could do if you weren't constrained by the, you know, current Oracle model of doing everything on chain and paying a gas cost for it.
Thanks so much. Does anyone have any questions for our panelists? I think that will be just about it. Thank you all so much. Thank you, panelists, for showing up here. Thank you all for showing up for the second ZK Dive, and hope you have a great day.
Cool.